The first thing I noticed about Dante Salvatore was not his face. It was the silence that arrived before him. The dining room had been full a second earlier. Low Italian, the drag of cigar smoke, the soft click of silver against porcelain. Men in dark suits sat around the black walnut table like they had been carved there. The chandeliers threw light into the cut glass and made everything glitter, too cold to be called beautiful. Then the doors opened, and the room went still in a way that felt practiced, not afraid. Worse than afraid. Disciplined. I stood near the sideboard with a crystal decanter in both hands and wished, for the 100th time that night, that Teresa had put anyone else in my place. She had signed too fast in the kitchen for my nerves to keep up. Carry, pour, leave. Eyes down. Do not stop unless he tells you to stop. I had nodded like that made me competent. I was 23. I had folded sheets in that house for 11 days. I knew which corridor smelled like lemon polish and which one smelled like gun oil. I knew the east wing stayed locked. I knew the men at the gates never smiled. I knew Teresa Marini, who ran the house with her iron spine and quiet rosary, only put me in the dining room because one of the regular maids had fainted from a fever, and because I was the only one still standing. I did not know how to carry a tray past men who could end lives with the same hand that lifted a wine glass. Dante took the seat at the head of the table. I looked down fast, but not fast enough. He was not the oldest man in the room, not the loudest. His hair was black enough to look blue under the chandelier. His suit was charcoal, cut close, no ring except the heavy one with the Salvatore crest on his right hand. His face should have been handsome in an easy way. That there was nothing easy in it. He looked like the deep part of winter water, still on top, deadly underneath. He said something in Italian I only caught pieces of. Shipment, delay, harbor. A man to his left answered too quickly. Another one swallowed. I moved when Teresa flicked 2 fingers at me from the doorway. Pour. The decanter was heavier than I had expected. My palms were already damp. I stepped to Dante first because that was the order, and because not doing that felt like a worse mistake. The glass in front of him was different from the rest. The others were clean, modern stems. His was older, thinner, with tiny engraved vines curling around the bowl. It caught the light with a faint green fire. Beautiful. Fragile. The kind of thing that belonged in a locked cabinet, not in front of a man discussing murder over veal and red wine. My wrist shook. Just once. Enough. The neck of the decanter hit the rim of the glass. Crystal struck crystal with a hard, bright note. The old glass tipped. I reached for it too late. It hit the edge of the table, shattered on the marble floor, and the room emptied of sound so completely. I heard one shard spin. Nobody moved. Not Teresa in the doorway. Not the man holding a fork halfway to his mouth. Not me. Until instinct got there before fear. I dropped to my knees. The wine spread dark across the white marble like fresh blood. Crystal glittered through it. One jagged piece slid toward Dante's shoe. I set my hand over it without thinking, stopping it with my palm. The edge bit deep. Pain flashed hot and immediate. I kept going. I started gathering the shards with my bare hands. Teresa made a small, horrified sound. I did not look at her. I did not look at the blood opening across my skin either. I just cleared the floor in front of him piece by piece because broken glass cut people long after the mistake itself was over. Because in every house I had ever worked in, you fixed what you could before punishment arrived. Because I could not speak, and there was no point pretending I could explain this into something smaller. A drop of my blood landed on the marble beside his polished shoe. The chair scraped back. A hand closed around my wrist. Not hard. Hard enough. I froze. The shard in my palm pressed deeper. Enough, a man said above me. His voice was low. Calm. The kind of calm that made every other man in the room go flatter around the edges. Dante. He took the crystal from my hand himself. Set it on the tablecloth as if it were nothing worth noticing. Then he bent. When his fingers touched my chin, I stopped breathing. He tilted my face up. I had to look at him now. Up close, his eyes were not black. They were dark hazel ringed in something almost gold, the color buried so deep I only saw it when the chandelier struck. There was no anger in them. I would have preferred anger. Anger was human. This was assessment. Blood slid from my palm to my wrist. He looked at that. Then at my mouth. Then back into my eyes. "Do you speak?" he asked. I shook my head once. The man at his left answered for me. "The new maid is mute, boss." Something changed in Dante's face. Not softness, not sympathy, just a sharpening, as if another piece of the room had clicked into place. He kept my chin in his hand. The entire table waited. When he spoke, he did it quietly enough that everyone had to lean into the silence to hear him. "You broke my favorite glass." My heart slammed once against my ribs. He was close enough that I smelled his cologne cedar and something colder beneath it. Night air clinging to wool. His thumb rested just under my jaw. Not cruel, not kind. The blood in my palm started to throb. Then he said, "You'll pay for this." A few of the men shifted, relieved maybe. That sounded like a sentence they understood. But he did not let go of my face. "Stay with me." The words did not make sense at first. I stared at him. Around us, nobody spoke. I knew enough of rich men and dangerous men to understand an order when I heard one, even if I didn't understand the shape of it yet. He released my chin. "Teresa," he said without looking away from me. "Bandage her hand. Move her room to the north wing." The housekeeper went pale. "Dante." He lifted 2 fingers. She stopped. The man on his left frowned. "You're keeping her?" Dante straightened to his full height. I wasn't aware I had asked for counsel over a glass. No one answered. I rose too fast. My knees almost gave out. Teresa came to me at once and pulled a linen napkin around my hand. Tight enough to sting, I let her guide me backward. But I made the mistake of looking at him one more time. He was still watching me. Not the wrecked floor, not the ruined relic. Me. As Teresa hurried me from the room, the heavy doors opened, then swung shut behind us with a deep, final thud. The sound traveled all the way through the bones of the house. The door locked. The north wing had thicker carpets and fewer windows. That was the first difference I noticed when Teresa led me there with my hand wrapped in white and my pulse still stumbling over itself. The second was the quiet. The servants' rooms in the south corridor held the ordinary noises of work linen carts, running taps, someone laughing too loud and then cutting it off. The north wing sounded expensive enough to be empty. My new room had cream walls, a narrow bed, a wardrobe that smelled faintly of cedar, and a brass lamp on a writing desk. The sheets were too soft. The rug was too thick. Even the air felt different. Colder somehow, as if this part of the house belonged to people who never had to hurry. Teresa shut the door behind us and unwrapped my hand. I hissed through my teeth even though no sound came out. "You foolish girl," she said. But there was more fear than anger in it. She dabbed antiseptic into the cut with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times. "Who told you to pick up crystal with your bare hands?" I lifted my good shoulder. "Instinct." Her mouth tightened. "That answer explains nothing." I reached for the notebook in my apron pocket. Teresa always made sure I had one. Cheap paper, blue cover, corners softened by use. I wrote with my left hand, slow because my fingers were shaking. It would have cut him. Teresa read it. Then she looked at me for a long moment. I could not read. "It would have cut the marble more likely than him," she said at last. "Men like him do not get hurt by accidents, only by people." I thought of the room going silent when Dante entered, of the way nobody had moved until he did, of the line of his mouth when he said, "Stay with me." Teresa finished the bandage and tied it off with a hard little tug. "Listen to me now." I nodded. "He gave you a room in this wing because this is where he puts what he does not want touched." She crossed herself almost absently, thumb to sternum. "That can mean safety. It can also mean the opposite." I swallowed. She saw that and softened by a fraction. "I am trying to warn you, not frighten you." "Too late for that." I wrote, "Can I leave?" She read it. Her eyes did not move from the page for a second too long. Then she said, "Not tonight." That answer was worse than no. When she left, I sat on the bed and looked at the brass lamp until my breathing settled. My old room over Mrs. Batten. D'Angelo's bakery had peeling paint and a radiator that shrieked like an offended bird every winter morning. The window jammed when it rained. The mattress bowed in the middle. I'd hated the place sometimes. Now I would have given anything to hear that radiator start up and smell yeast rising through the floorboards. Before this house, my life had been small enough to fit inside habits. Wake before light. Help Mrs. D'Angelo knead the dough if my early shift at the hotel laundry didn't start first. Carry coins in a tin for rent. Walk to speech therapy on Tuesdays even though the clinic had stopped promising improvement years ago. Work. Wash. Sleep. Repeat. Ordinary could be cruel in its own ways. Ordinary still had mercy. It let you know what tomorrow looked like. This house had taken tomorrow and folded it shut. A knock came just before midnight. Not the brisk rap of Teresa. Not the nervous tap of another maid. 3 even knocks, spaced like a decision. I stood too fast and nearly tipped the chair. When I opened a door, Nico Ferrara leaned on the frame with one shoulder, broad and dark-haired and carrying a tray with a bowl of broth, bread, and a little dish of apricot jam that made no sense at all. "Peace offering," he said. "From Teresa. The jam is from me." He was one of Dante's men. I knew that much. I had seen him at the front drive, hand on the back door of Dante's car, scanning the gates while the others looked wherever he looked. He was younger than the men at the dinner table, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of face that could have belonged to a schoolteacher if you ignored the gun under his jacket. I stepped aside. "Smart," he said, entering. "Never leave a tray in the hallway in this house. Someone will assume it's poison. Then everyone gets dramatic." Despite myself, I smiled. He noticed and grinned. "There. Better." He set the tray down. His eyes dropped to my bandaged hand. "That was a hell of a first impression." I wrote, "I'd rather not make another one." He laughed softly. "Good instinct." I hesitated, then wrote, "Why am I here?" Nico read it and exhaled through his nose. "If I knew how Dante's mind worked, I'd sleep better." He leaned back against the desk. "He keeps very few things close. Fewer people. So if he moved you up here, it means you matter now." I stared at the words after he handed the notebook back. Matter now. I had spent most of my life learning how not to. Nico saw something in my face and his own changed a little. Gentler. "Not always a bad thing," he said. That I did not believe. Another knock cut across the room before I could answer. Nico straightened at once. Dante entered without waiting. He filled the doorway in a plain black shirt, with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. No jacket, no tie, which somehow made him look more dangerous. Less ceremonial, more real. His gaze went first to the tray, then to Nico, then to me. "Nico. Boss. Out." Nico left with a small, almost apologetic lift of his brows at me. The door shut behind him. Dante did not sit. He walked once around the room the way a man might test the dimensions of a cell. "The North Wing has rules," he said. I stayed standing because sitting felt foolish. He glanced at my bandaged hand. No east corridor. No windows after dark without the curtains closed. If Teresa tells you to move, you move. If Nico says stay behind him, you do it. I found the notebook. Am I a maid or a prisoner? His eyes lowered to the page, then to my face. "Yes," he said. I frowned. One corner of his mouth shifted, but not enough to be called a smile. "You will work when Teresa says. You will stay where I say. Those things are not in conflict." My pulse kicked hard, maybe because I was tired, maybe because he could say something that monstrous as if he were discussing weather. I wrote more sharply this time. "For how long?" He took the notebook from my fingers himself. Not rough. Not asking either. He set it on the desk and stepped closer. "I had to tip my head back again. Until I know what to do with you," he said. The room felt suddenly smaller than it was. I wanted to look away. I didn't. He noticed that too. His gaze flicked once to my mouth, once to the pulse at my throat, and then he stepped back before I could understand why my skin had gone warm. "You should sleep," he said. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. At the door, he paused. Then, without turning, he added, "You leave when I open the gate." I believed him. By morning, the house had learned me. Servants' houses always did. They absorbed your pace, measured your worth, assigned you a place in the invisible ladder before the first week was out. But the Salvatore estate did it faster because everyone already knew what had happened in the dining room. Nobody said it outright. They just looked at my bandage, then at the north wing stairs, then away. A man who had once unloaded trucks at the hotel laundry told me silence was another form of gossip. I understood what he meant now. Teresa put me to work pressing linens and sorting silver in a pantry that smelled like beeswax and starch. She spoke to me as she always had, briskly, in clipped instructions, her vowels sharpening when she was anxious, but there was a new watchfulness in her, as if she expected me to crack if she took her eyes off me for too long. Around noon, Nico found me polishing serving trays. "Field trip," he said. I blinked at him. He jerked his chin toward the door. "Bring your notebook." Teresa appeared out of nowhere, drying her hands on a towel. "Why? Boss wants her eyes." That made no sense to me until we were in the back seat of a black sedan with dark windows, the city sliding by in strips of gray lake light and brick. Nico drove. Dante sat opposite me, one arm along the door reading from a folder thick with numbers. Nobody explained anything. Chicago looked different through armored glass, cleaner in some places, harsher in others. Men on corners glanced at our car and then away too quickly. We turned off the avenue by the river and went through a gate into a shipping yard lined with stacked containers painted in faded reds and blues. Cranes loomed like iron birds above the docks. Diesel hung in the air. So did the sharp metallic cold of the lake. Armed men stood in little clusters, pretending not to watch the boss's car arrive. I understood then what Nico had meant. The shape of his empire was not chandeliers and marble. It was this: steel. Water. Men holding violence in their shoulders like a profession. Dante got out first. Nico came around for my door. I wrote, "Why am I here?" He read it and said, "You'll see." We were taken into an office above the loading floor. The windows looked down over forklifts, pallets, and a caged freight elevator. 3 men waited inside. One I recognized from the dinner table, another I recognized from somewhere older and uglier, the warehouse district. Smoke, a voice shouting over flame. Memory brushed me so fast I almost missed my step. The third man had a scar splitting one eyebrow and a mouth too smooth for honesty. He spoke in Italian. Fast. Defensive. Dante listened without interruption. Then he said something quiet. The scarred man answered louder. All the while I watched their mouths. It was a habit from childhood, sharpened after the fire took my voice and left me clinging harder to everyone else's. Most people didn't know how much they said before sound. Lips shaped truth differently than words did. Fear showed at the corners. Lies sat too carefully. The scarred man said, "The Vieri route is clean. Tuesday night. He knows nothing, but his mouth snagged on Tuesday." The lie sat there, bright as a cut. I stepped forward without thinking. Every man in the room turned. I took out my notebook and wrote fast. My letters slanted when I was nervous. He lied about Tuesday. Nico took the page first, then handed it to Dante. The room went very still. The scarred man laughed too loudly. "What is this?" Dante read my note once. Then he lifted his gaze to the man. "Say it again," he said. The man's face changed, not much. "Enough," he repeated himself. This time, I saw the other lie, not route. Time, I wrote again. Tonight, not Tuesday. The man lunged for the door. He made it one step. Nico hit him hard enough to crack his cheek against the desk. I flinched. Dante didn't. He only turned his head slightly toward me. How? I swallowed and wrote slower this time. He shapes Tuesday with his tongue. He didn't. He said tonight before he said it aloud. The man on the floor spat blood and cursed me. Dante ignored him. You read lips. I nodded. Something like comprehension moved through his expression. A link made in his mind. One I couldn't see yet. Then he took my notebook and beneath my last line wrote in clean, narrow script, "Who taught you?" "My father," I wrote. He stared at that answer longer than he should have. Before he could say more, the office windows blew inward. Glass burst across the room in a shriek of light. I hit the floor by reflex, arms over my head. Men shouted. Somewhere below, a truck alarm started howling. Smoke rolled up from the yard. Nico dragged me behind an overturned filing cabinet, a heartbeat before a second blast shook the building. Dante did not duck. He was already moving, one hand on his gun, the other hauling the scarred man upright by the collar, as if the man weighed nothing. He said something in Italian so flat it chilled me more than the explosion. The answer came from outside in the shape of gunfire. Nico crouched in front of me, shielding me with his body. "You good?" I nodded, though my ears were ringing. Dante turned back once, just once, checking that I was behind cover. His eyes found mine through the drifting dust. Not warm. Not gentle. Certain. Then he was gone from the office and into the smoke. By the time we got back to the estate after dark, 2 men were dead, 1 root had been burned, and every face in the house looked sharpened by the same hard thought. This was no longer about a broken glass. At the foot of the north wing stairs, Dante stopped me with 1 word. Sophia. It was the first time I had heard my name in his mouth. I turned. He stood in the entrance hall under the long portrait of some dead Salvatore with the same severe mouth. Gunpowder still clung faintly to Dante's shirt beneath the cedar scent. There was blood on his cuff that was not his. "Your father's name," he said. "What was it?" The question sliced through me so cleanly I forgot to breathe. I wrote with fingers that wanted to shake. Matteo Bellini. His stare hardened into something I could not place. Not suspicion, recognition. Behind him, thunder rolled over the lake. Somewhere deep in the house, a lock turned. Someone was already moving against us. That night the storm came in low over the water and sat on the estate like a threat. Rain struck the windows in hard sheets. The old house answered with sounds I had not yet learned, pipes ticking in the walls, distant hinges, one long groan from somewhere near the east corridor that made me think of ships. Teresa said storms made the place remember its age. She said it while folding towels with her rosary wrapped around one wrist, as if memory itself required prayer. I was carrying fresh linens upstairs when the first shot cracked across the grounds. Not thunder. I knew thunder now. This was sharper. The hallway snapped alive. Men moved at both ends of it, jackets open, hands at their backs. Teresa swore under her breath and shoved the linen stack out of my arms. "Inside," she said. I wrote, "Your room?" "No, mine's too far." A second shot. Closer. The lights flickered once, went out, came back dim on the emergency circuit. In the yellowed half-dark, the portraits along the corridor looked suddenly malicious. Teresa grabbed my arm. We barely made it 6 steps before someone came around the corner fast enough to stop us both. Dante. His shirt was dark with rain at the shoulders. His gun was already in his hand. He took the corridor in one sweep, eyes moving over doors, corners, windows. Then he looked at Teresa, then at me. "Basement chapel," he said. Teresa started to answer. Another burst of gunfire ripped through the lower floor. Men shouted downstairs. Something heavy shattered. Dante crossed the distance between us in 2 strides and took me by the back of the neck. Not roughly, but with a certainty that erased argument. He pushed Teresa toward the stairwell with his free hand. "Nico's with the staff," he said. "Go." Teresa hesitated. Now, she went. I didn't have time to decide anything because Dante was already moving me the opposite direction, down a narrow servant's staircase I had never seen, one hand firm at my nape, the other holding the gun low and ready. The stone steps were cold under my bare feet where my shoes had slipped in the scramble. The air smelled of damp mortar and candle wax. At the bottom of the stairs was a little room with a vaulted ceiling and a marble altar no wider than a table. A private chapel hidden under a house full of armed men. There were no windows, just one iron lamp burning red before a carved Madonna whose face had been softened by years of smoke. Dante shut us inside and slid the bolts. The silence that followed felt wrong. Too complete. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my bandaged hand. He checked the room automatically, though there was nowhere to hide in it except behind faith itself. Then he looked at me for the first time since dragging me downstairs. "You're shaking." I wanted to be offended by how plain he made it sound. I took out my notebook with numb fingers. "Men are shooting at your house. Yes, I think that justifies it." For the first time I saw it clearly and nearly smile, gone before it fully formed. Then a shout carried faintly through the floor above us. Dante went still. Not alert. Still in a different way, as if some private door in him had slammed shut. His eyes fixed on nothing. His hand tightened once around the gun. I had seen shell-shocked veterans at the clinic where I did, filing on Thursdays, men who came apart, not when the danger arrived, but when it sounded too much like something old. Before I could stop myself, I touched his wrist. He looked down at my fingers like he had forgotten I was there. Another crash above us snapped him back. He breathed once through his nose, slow and controlled. "Sorry." The apology startled me more than the gunfire had. He noticed that too. "I don't say that often." "I wrote, I know." His gaze dropped to the page, then lifted. "Do you?" It wasn't a question. A shot struck something overhead. Dust sifted from the ceiling. I flinched. Dante moved without thinking and pulled me behind him, his body between mine and the door. The chapel became too small all at once. My shoulder brushed the stone wall. His chest nearly touched mine. Rain and gunpowder and cedar. The cold metal smell of a weapon warmed by his hand. I was trying not to notice the size of him. That was exactly why I noticed everything. The rolled sleeves, the vein moving once in his forearm, the wet ends of his hair curling slightly at the nape, the scar visible where his shirt had shifted open near the collarbone, thin and white, old as a promise kept too late. He followed my glance. His hand came up, almost absently, covering the scar through the fabric. Then he dropped it. The gesture had been small. The silence after it was not. I wrote before I could decide not to. Who did that? His mouth flattened. He did not answer. The refusal itself told me more than a speech would have. Something softer took its place a moment later when he noticed blood seeping through my bandage. "Sit." I didn't move quickly enough, so he took the notebook from me, set it on the altar, and guided me down onto the low wooden kneeler. He crouched in front of me, a mafia boss in a storm-dark chapel opening Teresa's bandage with hands steadier than mine. The cut had started bleeding again when I stumbled on the stairs. He cleaned it with bottled water from a shelf near the candles. The sting made my breath catch. "Hold still," he said. I wanted to tell him that was easy for a man built out of restraint to say. Instead, I sat very still and watched his hands. They were beautiful hands in the most inconvenient way. Large, square-palmed, scarred across the knuckles. The hands of a man who had broken things and buried them and still knew how to wrap gauze without hurting me more. Above us, the violence went on. Distant now, muffled by stone. In that tiny room, his attention narrowed until it felt like touch in places he had not touched at all. When he finished, he did not let go of my hand immediately. Neither did I. His thumb rested once against the pulse in my wrist. A simple point of contact. Nothing. Everything. Then he looked up. I forgot the storm, the gunfire. My own name. His eyes dropped to my mouth and stayed there long enough that I felt the awareness of my own lips like a bruise. The air shifted. He must have felt it too because his hand loosened at once. He stood, put distance back where it belonged. "You father," he said. "Too controlled now, worked at the North Docks." It took me a second to find the notebook with fingers that no longer worked right. How do you know that? I remember names that matter. The answer landed in me strangely. Before I could write again, the bolt lifted. Nico stepped inside, damp and breathing hard. Perimeter's clean, 2 on the west wall, 1 in the trees. Teresa's fine. Dante nodded once. Nico looked from him to me, and then carefully at anything else. Right. When we climbed back upstairs, the house smelled of wet stone, burned wiring, and fear carefully folded away. At my door, Dante paused. He said without looking at me, "No one gets this close unless I allow it." I should have been reassured. I wasn't. Nothing after that felt harmless. 2 mornings later, Paolo Serra arrived before breakfast and changed the temperature of the house. He was older than Dante by maybe 20 years, silver at the temples, priest gentle in his movements, the kind of man who wore civility like a tailor-made suit. I had seen him once before across the foyer, his hand resting lightly on Dante's shoulder in a gesture so familiar it looked almost paternal. The staff relaxed around him in a way they never did around the others. That alone should have warned me. Monsters rarely came with kind voices. Those men preferred to send other people first. I was in the breakfast room laying out cups when Paolo entered with Dante and Nico behind him. Teresa, carrying a pot of coffee, stiffened almost imperceptibly. Paolo kissed her cheek. She allowed it because not allowing it would have been a statement. He turned to me and smiled. "Sofia Bellini," he said. The tray slipped in my fingers but didn't fall. Dante's head turned so fast the movement looked violent. I stared at Paolo. He should not have known that name. I had given Teresa only Sofia when I came to the estate, Sofia and references from the hotel laundry. Bellini was a name that had gotten my father killed. If half the whispers I grew up under were true. Paolo watched the panic sharpen in my face and seemed to enjoy how carefully he hid that enjoyment. I thought so. Dante's voice went flat. "Explain." Paolo reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed a small leather ledger on the breakfast table between the coffee cups and the silver jam spoon. I knew it before my mind caught up. My father's. The brown leather was cracked at the corners. One brass edge was bent from the warehouse fire. I had hidden it under a loose floorboard in my old room over the bakery and checked twice before I left that it was still there. I looked at Nico, then Teresa, then back at the ledger. I had not brought it here. Paolo laid a gentle hand over the cover like a man introducing scripture. Found in her room this morning. My stomach dropped. Someone had moved it there. Dante looked at me once. Only once. That was enough to make my skin go cold. I took the notebook from my apron and wrote so fast, I tore the paper. It was not in my room. I didn't bring it here. Paolo read over Dante's shoulder before Dante could stop him. What an unfortunate thing to have to say. Nico's expression darkened. Teresa set down the coffee pot so precisely that I knew she was furious. Dante opened the ledger. Columns of numbers marched across the pages in my father's tight script. But not just numbers, marks in the margins, tiny coded letters beside shipping dates. My father had taught me the pattern when I was 12, turning accountancy into a game on the back of grocery receipts, because he liked that I understood systems faster than people. He had not known those lessons would become the only map he left me. Dante flipped to the back pages. His jaw set. Paolo said, "Matteo Bellini was accused of skimming from Salvatore accounts before the fire. You can imagine my concern when his daughter appears in your home under a false name." Concern. Such a pretty word for a knife. I wrote, "I did not come here for him. I came for work." Paolo tipped his head. "Did you?" Dante was still reading. The room waited on him. Finally he said, "These are not theft records." Paolo went very still. Dante lifted his gaze. "These are diversions, shell companies. Harbor percentages moved through Vieri warehouses." The silence after that changed shape. Paolo recovered first. "If true?" Dante shut the ledger. "If true." The older man spread one hand. "Dead men leave convenient stories." I stepped forward before fear could stop me. I pointed to the book, then to myself. When Dante looked at me, I reached for the notebook again. Page 19. Last line. The code means duplicate manifest. My father used it when numbers were copied to a second book. Dante opened to the page. His eyes moved. Stopped. Nico came around behind him and swore softly. Paolo's expression remained composed. Too composed. Dante said, "There's a second ledger." I nodded. Paolo asked carefully, "Do you know where?" No, I wished I did. My father had died before he could tell me what any of it meant, much less where the proof had gone. I wrote the truth. No. Paolo looked almost relieved. Dante saw that, something in him chilled by another degree. Breakfast did not happen. By noon, men were tearing through old doc records, and the whole house hummed with contained violence. Teresa sent me to the greenhouse to strip dead leaves from the lemon trees just to get me out of everyone's line of sight. The glass overhead sweated from the heat. Wet earth and citrus filled the air. Outside, the lake wind bent the hedges silver. I was kneeling beside a terracotta pot when the door opened. Dante came in alone. I stood too quickly. Dirt brushed my skirt. He held the ledger. For a moment, neither of us spoke him because he chose not to. Me because I could not. The greenhouse magnified every small sound, leaves shifting, water ticking through old pipes, my own breath. At last he said, "Your father wasn't a thief." I looked down, not because I didn't believe him, because I did, and it hurt in a place I had kept boarded over for years. He crossed the room and put the ledger on the potting bench. I should have known his numbers were too clean for a sloppy betrayal. The words were not quite an apology. Close enough that it made my throat ache anyway. I wrote, "People said he burned because he ran." Dante read it and looked at the floor once before answering. People say what the dead can't contradict. I did something. Then I had not done in front of anyone since the clinic gave up on my voice. I lifted 2 fingers to the scar at my throat. His eyes followed the movement. "I was there," I wrote. At the warehouse. Understanding hit him visibly. "That's why you knew the yard. That's why you recognized the blast." I nodded. He was quiet for a long time. "Then, how old?" 12. His hand flattened on the edge of the bench, knuckles whitening just once. His control slipped by a fraction, and because it was him, that fraction felt enormous. I wrote before courage died. "What about you?" His gaze sharpened. "What about me?" I touched my throat, then pointed lightly at the scar near his collarbone I had seen in the chapel. For a second, I thought he might walk away. Instead, he said, "A car door." Nothing more. But something in the way he looked past me, at memory, instead of glass and leaves, told me everything important, lived in what he was not saying. We stood in that damp, bright heat, with grief moving between us like another body. Then the greenhouse door banged open hard enough to rattle the panes. Nico came in breathing fast. "Boss." Dante turned. Eastgate guards gone. Vanished. No camera gap. Nico's gaze flicked to me, then back. Somebody inside had to blind the feed. Dante didn't move for a beat. Then he looked at Paolo's ledger in my father's dead leather binding. When he spoke, it was almost gentle. "Someone close," he said, "opened the door." The ambush happened at a funeral lunch, which felt obscene enough to be fitting. A capo's mother had died on the south side, and half the city's respectable sinners came to pay respect in black wool and polished shoes. The restaurant closed its front room for the Salvatore family. White tablecloths, gold-rimmed plates, candles standing in glass like little trapped ghosts. Outside, the street shone wet from an afternoon rain. I should not have been there. Teresa had argued that point with Dante in the foyer, while I stood in my borrowed black dress pretending not to understand how completely my life had veered off its rails. But the estate was being swept room by room for listening devices. And Dante did not want me in a house already breached from the inside. So I sat 3 tables back from him beside Teresa and Nico, hands folded in my lap, trying not to feel the weight of every armed man in the room pretending to eat veal. The smell of tomato sauce and gun oil did not belong together. Neither did grief and strategy. Italian drifted over the clink of cutlery. The room kept tightening and loosening around Dante's mood. Men leaned when he spoke, stopped when he lifted a finger. I knew enough now to read the structure of his authority even when I couldn't hear every word. He never fought for space. Space moved for him. I also knew enough to feel him notice me without looking. It happened twice, maybe 3 times. My skin learned him before my mind wanted to. I was reaching for my water when the waiter at Dante's left table drew a gun from beneath a folded napkin. Everything after that broke open. Nico hit the floor first, grabbing Teresa down with him. The first shot shattered a candle glass. The second took a man through the throat. Chairs overturned. Women screamed in the private room beyond the partition. Dante was already moving before the third shot fired, knocking the gunman's wrist aside so the bullet ripped into the ceiling. 2 more men came through the kitchen doors, the restaurant filled with the deafening metal noise of war at close range. I crawled under the table because instinct was not noble and I had no wish to die proving otherwise. Broken glass slid under my palms. Someone's heel caught my shoulder. Nico shouted my name. A body hit the table and sent plates crashing around me. Then I saw the man angling toward Teresa with a knife. He had the side room, he had cover, he had her because she had twisted her ankle falling and could not get up fast enough. I did not think. Thinking would have left her dead. I grabbed the heavy silver water pitcher from the floor and swung it with both hands when he reached down for her. It hit the side of his head with a sound I felt in my teeth. He staggered. Teresa gasped. Nico shot him before he fully turned. Then another shooter appeared at the broken front window and aimed straight at me. Dante crossed the room like an impact. One moment, the man had a line to my chest. The next, Dante was in front of me, shoving me down behind the ruined table while firing one-handed through the drift of steam and powder. The shot hit true. The man went backward through the window. I stared up at Dante from the floor. This was not the man who had wrapped my hand in a chapel. This was what lived underneath him. He moved without wasted motion, without shouting, without any visible hesitation. He put 2 bullets into a man already falling because certainty mattered more than mercy. He stepped over blood as if blood had forfeited the right to be shocking years ago. When one attacker grabbed for me from the side, Dante broke the man's wrist, then his throat, and never took his eyes off the room. It terrified me. It did something else too, something worse, because terror was at least clean. And I did not sleep the night after the restaurant. I lay in the north wing with the curtains drawn and tasted smoke every time I closed my eyes. The cut on my palm had reopened in 2 places. There was a bruise, darkening on my hip where I had hit the floor. My mouth still held the ghost of Dante's kiss from the hour after we got home, when he had stood in my doorway with blood drying at his throat and looked at me like he hated himself for wanting proof I was alive. It had not been a sweeping thing, not a romance novel claim. Just his hand at the back of my neck, my notebook slipping from my fingers to the rug, my body trembling before his did. I had leaned into him first. Then I had written against his chest with my hand shaking so badly the letters looked childlike. "I'm not afraid of you." He had read it, shut his eyes once, and answered against my hair. "That's what I'm afraid of." By morning the war had moved into daylight. The estate smelled of strong coffee, gun oil, and wet coats. Men came and went through the back entrance with the clipped speed of people carrying bad news in pieces. 2 cars had burned overnight near a Vieri warehouse. One Salvatore driver had vanished on the Kennedy. Somebody had put a bullet through a judge's home office window at 3 in the morning. Not a kill. A reminder. Teresa took one look at my face and said nothing at all, which was how I knew she understood too much. She buttoned me into a plain gray dress with the stern care of an aunt dressing a child for church. Her hands lingered once at my collar. "He means to send you away." I looked at her in the mirror. She nodded. Good men in his position become unbearable when frightened. I wrote, "He isn't frightened." A sad little line touched her mouth. "No, Cara, that is exactly what he is." The decision was waiting in the library. Dante stood by the cold fireplace with Nico on one side and Paolo on the other. That sight alone made my stomach knot now. Since the ledger, I had started watching Paolo the way you watch water after someone says there might be glass in it. He was too smooth, too ready, too interested in what I knew. On the desk lay a set of car keys, a thick envelope, and papers with a false name clipped at the corner. Dante did not ask me to sit. "You're leaving for Milwaukee," he said. The words landed without warning, even though Teresa had prepared me for them. Nico looked as unhappy as I felt. Paolo looked appropriately grave. I took the notebook out slowly. "For how long? Until this is done. You said I leave when you open the gate. I'm opening it. That should have felt like mercy. It felt like being cut away." I wrote more sharply. "Because of me? No." His voice stayed level. "Because of what they'll do to get to me through you." The truth of it shamed me because some part of me had wanted the answer to be simpler. Smaller, something I could hate him for. I wrote, "I can help." Paolo stepped in before Dante could answer. "With respect, child, this is not your fight." Everything in me recoiled from the word child. Dante saw it. His gaze flicked to Paolo, then back to me. "This is exactly why you're leaving. I need to know one thing in the city is not in reach of their hands. Not in reach. Not with him." I looked at the papers again. A new name. A bus route. Cash enough to begin a life that had no marble floors, and no iron gates, and no man whose silence I had started measuring my breathing against. Stage 1 had died somewhere between the chapel and the restaurant floor. I knew that now. I had told myself he was dangerous in a way that could remain outside me if I moved carefully, but the danger had shifted. It lived in the place inside me that had gone still when he touched my jaw. In the awful relief I felt when he entered a room. In the fact that his violence terrified me and I could no longer pretend that was all it did. I was not afraid of him. I was afraid of myself, around him. Teresa escorted me to the side entrance. Nico carried my small bag. It held 3 dresses, my wages, my old apartment key, and the blue notebook that had become more confession than tool. The morning air was bitter and bright. The gravel drive glittered with frost. At the car, Teresa caught my good hand and pressed something into it, her rosary. I stared. "For luck," she said. I wanted to refuse. It was too personal, too much like goodbye, but her fingers closed mine over the worn beads. "Listen to me," she said quietly. "If you go, go cleanly. Don't spend years haunting yourself. If you stay, do not call it fate. Call it choice and bear it properly." My throat tightened. Nico opened the rear door, and Paolo appeared with his coat half-buttoned, breath fogging in the cold. "1 minute," he said. "Dante wants the girl to confirm a mark in the ledger before she leaves. It will take 30 seconds. Nico frowned. "He didn't tell me that." "He told me. That should have been enough to stop it. It wasn't. That was my mistake. Not because I trusted Paolo. Because I trusted the old shape of the house. The idea that if a thing happened in the open, in daylight with Nico 10 feet away, it could not go all the way bad. I stepped back from the car. Teresa's hand tightened on my sleeve. She did not like it either. "Make it here," she said to Paolo. He smiled. "Of course." He opened the rear passenger door himself. The rag hit my mouth before I understood anything. Chemical sweetness, a hand like iron at the back of my head. I jerked hard, nails raking skin, but the world tilted sideways already. Nico shouted. Teresa screamed my name, though no sound came out of me because names had never needed voices to matter. Through the blur, I saw Teresa move, not away, toward me, toward the man dragging me. The shot punched her backward into the frosted gravel. Everything after that smeared into white and gray. Nico firing. Men running from the house. Paolo's face above me at last without the civility, only flat impatience. The sky turning huge. Teresa's rosary digging into my fist. My own fault swelling bigger than breath. The last thing I saw before the drug pulled me under was Dante bursting through the side doors with murder already in his hands. Then the dark took me. I woke to damp concrete, rope against my wrists, and the smell of gasoline hiding badly under mold. For a few seconds, I didn't know where I was. Then the dark sharpened enough for memory to fit itself back into place like a blade. Paolo, Teresa falling, the rag. I sat up too fast. Pain flared behind my eyes. The room swayed, then steadied. It was large and windowless except for a line of high panes filmed white with old dirt. One bare bulb swung from a wire overhead, not enough to banish the corners. A radiator clicked uselessly somewhere behind stacked crates. The ropes at my wrists were tied to a pipe bolted into the wall. My ankles were free. That would have comforted me if the door hadn't been steel. The warehouse, not the same one from my childhood, but close enough in smell and shape that my body knew before my mind admitted it. Old lakefront brick, rotting pallets, a draft sneaking under metal. Somewhere outside, gulls cried over the water. I breathed in through my nose, out through my mouth. 4 counts. Again, panic was a door that opened onto nothing useful. When footsteps came, I had myself standing. Paolo entered first. No more soft old man kindness. No careful patience. He closed the door behind him and looked at me the way one looks at an inconvenient witness who has survived too long. I always disliked the mute ones, he said. People mistake silence for innocence. I would have answered if I could. Not because he deserved words, because fury needed somewhere to go. He followed my eyes to the rope. Don't bother. Raffaella paid good money for the knot. Then another man stepped in. Raffaella Vieri was not what I expected. He was elegant, mid-50s maybe, tall, silver at the temples, like Paolo, but prettier in a colder way. His overcoat was camel cashmere. His shoes were spotless despite the grime. He carried cruelty the way some men carried education, completely integrated into the voice, the posture, the assumption of being obeyed. He studied me for a long moment. So this is her. Paolo shut the door and stood at his shoulder. Raffaella smiled without warmth. You caused more trouble than I would have guessed. I lifted my chin. Small rebellions were still rebellions. That amused him. You know what interests me, he said. Not your father's book. Not Dante's little attachment. It's the first story Paolo told me about you. He moved closer, slow enough to make the whole thing intimate in the worst way. You broke a dead woman's crystal and then bled over the pieces rather than beg. I thought that would attract him. Men like Dante mistake endurance for destiny. Dead woman's crystal. The words hit me like a slap. His mother's, then. Or his sister's. My hand closed harder around Teresa's rosary in my pocket. Paolo must not have searched me well. Good. One thing still mine. Raffaella saw the movement. Hold that if you like. God has no jurisdiction here. He walked away before I could throw it at him. Paolo stayed, and because he stayed, I knew the shape of the betrayal at last. I stared at him, at the man who had kissed Teresa's cheek and called me child and carried himself like loyalty had raised him. He met my gaze with mild annoyance. You're making that face as if I owe you disappointment. I owed Dante something once, none anymore. My heart beat once, hard and painful. The old route. Dante's mother, his sister. Paolo saw understanding arrive. Yes, he said, that too. The room seemed to lose air. He was 19 and arrogant enough to think he could move them without telling the whole council, Paolo said almost conversationally. I corrected him. Raphael made better use of the information than I expected. I lunged before thought intervened. Rope bit my wrists. The pipe rang. Paolo barely flinched. Raffaella laughed softly. There's the father in her after all. When they left, I shook so badly I had to sit. Not from fear, not only fear, from the monstrous size of what I had helped happen. My mistake had not created Paolo. It had only opened the final door for him. Teresa was dead because I stepped back from the car. Dante's oldest wound had been kept bleeding by the man who stood beside him at tables and funerals and church steps. And I had not seen enough soon enough to stop any of it. I cried then briefly and furiously, because grief wanted the body before pride could argue. 4 tears, maybe 5. I wiped them away with my shoulder and looked at the room again. Not panic. Inventory. Pipe. Rope. Crates. Rusted nail half lifted from one pallet slat near the wall. Light fixture. One vent too narrow for escape. No camera visible. Door hinges inside. I sat on the floor and started sawing the rope against the edge of the exposed nail. Each stroke was tiny. Slow. I had time. Dante stood in the blood-wet gravel where Teresa had died and felt the city narrow to a point. Nico had a bandage around one arm and murder in his face. Men were already moving routes, cameras, harbor calls, every door in Chicago kicked inward if necessary. But none of it drowned the sight of the rosary bead broken under Teresa's shoulder. He had failed again. Different woman. Same old taste of metal in his mouth. Paolo's betrayal should have hollowed him. It did not. It clarified. That frightened him more. Rage was hot. This was clean. This was what Raffaella had always been, violence with every human edge planed off. What stopped him from becoming that was a mute girl with blood on her hands who still, impossibly, looked at broken things as if they could hurt someone after the mistake itself was done. He had noticed her because she bled before she begged. If he got to her too late, that would be the last true thing about him. By the time the rope frayed through one strand, the bulb had burned for what felt like hours. Night had settled outside the high windows. I knew because the light through them went from dirty gray to nothing at all. The door opened again. This time Paolo brought a phone. He held it up so I could see the screen. Dante, in live video, standing in the estate study. Face carved from something harder than flesh. Two of his men behind him. Nico just inside the frame, pale and furious. Paolo turned the camera toward me. I forced myself upright and showed no more fear than truth allowed. Dante's eyes found the rope first, then my face, then the smear of blood at my wrist where the nail had done its work. His expression did not change. That scared me for one clean second. Then I saw the pulse beating at the side of his throat. Paolo said to the phone, Pier 42, midnight, alone. Dante answered, If she has one more bruise when I arrive, I'll take you apart slowly enough to educate the city. Paolo smiled. There he is. Raffaella's voice came from somewhere behind the camera. Tell him to hurry. Old places burn quickly. The call cut. My stomach dropped. Burn, of course. I went back to the nail and tore skin off my wrists, getting the second strand loose. Outside, somewhere close now, an engine started. Too Late was moving toward us. The first shot came before midnight. It blew the padlock off the outer loading door with a metal shriek that ripped through the warehouse like daylight through rotten cloth. Men shouted. Tires screamed outside. Then the whole building answered with gunfire so dense it became weather. I had one wrist free by then. Not enough. Enough. I twisted hard, skinned the rest of my hand raw, and got loose from the pipe just as footsteps pounded past the office above. The door to my room remained shut. Locked from outside, I grabbed the loose length of rope and backed against the wall. Another shot. Another. Closer now. Then smoke. Not from gunfire, from accelerant catching somewhere down the corridor. Raffaella meant to make his own ending. I crossed to the door and slammed my shoulder against it. Once. Twice. The steel rang but held. Heat breathed under the threshold in thin, dirty waves. I looked around wildly and saw the bulb wire dangling low enough from the ceiling that if I jumped, I did. My fingers caught the cord. The bulb burst against the floor. Glass sprayed. Darkness crashed down. Good. I found the jagged metal base by touch and jammed it into the door seam where the latch met the frame, levered hard. Again. My palm slipped. Again. The latch gave half an inch. Then something hit the other side of the door, a body, or a shoulder. The steel flew inward. I stumbled back, weapon raised uselessly. Dante filled the doorway in smoke and sparks. For a second, neither of us moved. He looked wrecked open from the inside. Coat gone. Shirt dark, with blood in 3 places, only one of them his, I thought. Ash along one cheekbone. Eyes so fixed on me they seemed to make the room narrow. Then he was across it. His hands took my face, my shoulders, my wrists, checking damage faster than breath. I grabbed the front of his shirt because I needed something solid and because if I didn't touch him, I might not believe he was real. No words. No room for them. He pulled me into him so hard, my teeth clicked. I buried my face against his throat and tasted smoke and salt and a little blood. His hand covered the back of my head. My whole body shook once, violently, then settled because his did not. He drew back only enough to look at me. I touched my own throat, then pointed frantically upward. Paolo, Raffaele, fire. He understood all of it. Behind me, he said. I should say that I obeyed gracefully. I didn't. I stayed close enough to catch his sleeve when he moved, which was worse, but I moved. The corridor outside was a ruin of red emergency light, smoke and shouting from 2 floors at once. One man burned in the loading bay where accelerant had caught his jacket. Another dragged himself behind a crate, leaving a blood trail black in the low light. Dante shot him without slowing because the man still had a gun. That was the world. No speeches. No pauses, just consequence. Halfway to the stairs, I saw a sprinkler valve wheel on the wall and smelled the gasoline stronger ahead. I broke from Dante before he could stop me. Sophia, I grabbed the wheel with both hands and cranked. Rust fought me, then gave. Water screamed through old pipes overhead, a heartbeat later bursting from the sprinkler heads and dirty cold sheets. Fire hissed where it had begun, licking along the floorboards near the office stairs. Smoke changed direction. Dante looked back at me through the downpour and something fierce passed across his face. Approval. Fear. Both. Then Nico came out of the haze like a ghost with a gun. He was limping and white around the mouth, blood soaking one side of his jacket, but alive. I almost cried from the sight of him. Raphael's on the roof access, he snapped, Paolo with him. Dante took my wrist. This time not to drag. To keep. With me. We climbed. The stairwell smelled of wet rust and cordite. Water ran down the steps in pink rivulets. At the top landing, Paolo waited with a pistol and a smile that had finally dropped the human pretense entirely. He aimed at me. Dante stepped in front of me so fast I barely saw it happen. Paolo laughed once. Of course. He fired. Dante turned with the shot. The bullet grazed his ribs instead of his heart. Nico shot Paolo in the shoulder from below. The traitor staggered back against the roof door with surprise all over his face, as if pain itself were an indignity. Dante hit him then, not with flourish, just one brutal, efficient movement that drove the gun from Paolo's hand and the air from his lungs. I caught the railing because my knees wanted to give. Dante had Paolo by the throat now, pinning him against the wall. Say her name, Dante said. Paolo choked and smiled bloodily. Which one? Your mother's? Your sister's? The housekeeper's? I had never heard silence make a sound before. It did then. Dante did not kill him. That scared Paolo more than if he had. Nico hauled the older man back with curses under his breath while Dante shoved the roof door open into freezing lake wind and darkness silvered by distant city lights. Raffaele stood near the edge with 2 men left and a shotgun in his hands. He looked at the 3 of us, Dante bleeding, Nico limping, me drenched and shaking, and seemed almost pleased. There, he said softly. Now it looks expensive enough to matter. One of his men swung the shotgun toward me. I didn't wait to be protected. I grabbed the emergency axe from the wall cabinet by the door, the bright red one, meant for fires. No one expected to fight by hand, and hurled it at the floodlight mounted overhead. The glass exploded. Darkness swallowed the roof. Gunfire tore it apart. By the time the shooting stopped, one of Raffaele's men was over the edge. Another was face down in the puddles. And Dante was on one knee with blood running down his side while Raffaele vanished through a maintenance hatch toward the adjoining building. Nico cursed and moved after him. Dante caught my wrist before I could follow. His grip was hard with urgency, not anger. His forehead touched mine for one brutal second. You don't leave my sight again. I nodded, breathless and soaked. Below us, sirens began to rise. The city had finally heard us. Dawn came colorless over the river, as if the city was too tired to commit to light. We were in a disused machine shop 2 blocks from the burned warehouse because hospitals were impossible, while Raffaele still had men in uniforms and payroll offices and dispatch centers. Nico sat at a metal table while a medic stitched the crease in his thigh. Dante stood shirtless near a grimy sink, letting another man bandage the line of torn flesh along his ribs as if his own body were merely inconvenient. The room smelled of antiseptic, iron, coffee boiled too long, and engine grease baked into concrete from decades ago. I sat on an upturned crate with Teresa's rosary looped around my wrist and watched the water at the sink run pink. Nico was the one who found Raffaele's last move, not from fear, from arrogance. Paolo, half-conscious and bleeding through the shoulder, had laughed when they bound him to a chair in the next room. He said Raffaele would be at Pier 4 by sunrise, torching the remaining Salvatore manifests and every crate connected to my father's ledgers. Destroy the records, destroy the leverage, destroy the place Dante's father had built his legitimate face on top of. The last clean piece of the empire. Nico told us this with his jaw set like stone. Dante only nodded once. That was the worst I had ever seen him. Not enraged, empty of all softness, so controlled it looked like cruelty's final form. Then he turned to me and said, "You stay here." I shook my head before he finished. His stare pinned me. No. I stood anyway. I took the notebook, found a dry corner of the page, and wrote with fingers that still trembled from smoke and cold. Pier 4 uses old Italian numbering on the manifests. Raffaele won't know which book is true. I do. Dante read it. No. I wrote again, harder. You will need me. This is not courage, he said. This is exhaustion dressed up badly. Anger arrived clean and bright. Good. It gave me something to stand on. I wrote, "You do not get to decide I was brave only when it was useful to you." Nico looked between us and, wisely, said nothing. Dante stepped closer. "He will aim for you first. Then let him miss." His hand came up, fingers curling once near his side as if he wanted to take my shoulders and stop there. He didn't touch me. That restraint hurt worse. "You think seeing what I become out there will make this easier?" he asked quietly. I thought of the restaurant, the warehouse, Teresa in the gravel. The part of me that wanted him anyway. I wrote the truth. No. I think being left behind will make me less. Something broke behind his eyes then. Not control, something older. He turned away from me, breathed once. When he looked back, the decision had cost him enough that I could see the price. "You stay beside Nico," he said. "If I tell you down, you go down. If I say run, you do not look back." I nodded. That was how I went with them to the end. Pier 4 sat under a low ceiling of gulls and steel. The wind off the water had teeth. Stacked containers made canyons of rusted red and navy. Forklifts stood abandoned between pools of dirty dawn. Far out on the lake, freighters crawled like dark thoughts. Raffaele had men on the catwalks and in the offices. Too few for a siege. Enough for a slaughter if approached stupidly. Dante did not approach stupidly. He moved his people through the yard with the kind of silent precision that made me understand why other men feared him before they saw him. A hand signal. A pause. A shift of body in shadow. Violence prepared, not performed. Nico kept me low behind a stack of pallets near the manifest office. When the shooting started, it started everywhere. The first burst came from our side, dropping the catwalk guard before he finished lighting his cigarette. Then the yard erupted. Bullets whined off steel. Men shouted in Italian and English. A forklift windshield blew out. Someone fell from the upper rail and hit the pavement wrong. I ran when Nico ran. The office was a 2-story cinder block box with windows reinforced by wire mesh. Inside, paper flew in the draft from shattered glass. Files burned in metal bins where Raffaele had started his purge. He stood at the back room safe with one manifest book under his arm and a pistol in his hand. He saw me before he saw Dante. Of course he did. That was always the point. He grabbed me by the back of the coat and hauled me against him, gun cold at my ribs. My notebook flew from my hand and skidded under a desk. The room froze around the shape of the moment. Dante in the doorway, Nico bleeding at the shoulder behind him, fire brightening the corners of the office, Rafaela's breath steady against my temple. "There," Rafaela said. "Now you understand each other." Dante's voice was almost absent of tone. "Let her go." "No." Rafaela smiled. "You know why I always hated you? You pretend your restraint makes you different from men like me. But all it means is you enjoy the delay." His grip tightened. "How many bodies between who you were and who you are now, Dante?" I felt Dante go still. Mirror. That was what stood in front of us. Not a stranger. The end point of a path. Raffaele pressed the gun harder. "Choose. The books or the girl?" Dante looked at me. And I saw it then. The cost he had been keeping from himself. Not empire, not power. The belief that control could save what mattered if he was cold enough, disciplined enough, early enough. That belief had built him. It had also buried him alive. He dropped his gun. Raphael's smile widened. I moved. Not well, not gracefully. I drove my heel down on his instep and threw my weight backward at the same time, exactly as Teresa had once shown me to escape a drunk dishwasher who cornered maids in service alleys. Pain exploded along my side as the gun went off. The bullet tore through my coat instead of my body. Dante crossed the room in the same heartbeat. What he did next was too fast to see in parts. Only in result. Rafaela against the wall, gun gone, Dante's hands at his throat, the kind of violence with no performance left in it at all. Raffaele clawed and gasped and still managed one ugly laugh. There you are." Dante did not stop. Nico fired into the ceiling once. "Boss, it broke something." Dante looked at Raffaele like he had never seen a human face before. Then he let go. Just enough. Just long enough for me to see that if he killed him now, with his hands, he would not come back entirely. I went to Paolo instead. He had been dragged in with the last wave, tied to a chair by Nico's men so he could watch the end of the empire he sold twice over. He looked small suddenly. Old. Human, in the least flattering way. I picked up my notebook from the floor and wrote one line. Then I held it up for Dante. He chose the first fire. Dante turned. For the first time since I had known him, he looked wounded past speech. Paolo saw it and wept, not from remorse, from fear. "I made you strong," he said. "Your father would have lost everything." "No," Dante said. One word. Final. He took Paolo's gun from the desk and shot him once through the heart. Not slow. Not cruel. Not merciful either. Then he looked at Raffaele, who was still choking on the floor amid burning paper. "The records burn," Dante said. "The root dies. My father's peer dies with it." Raphael smiled redly. "Then I still take something." "Yes," Dante said. "So do I." He shoved the man backward into the office safe, kicked the fallen door shut, and spun the wheel home, while Raffaele started screaming inside the steel box as smoke filled it. Nico stared at him. I did too. There are moments after violence when the soul either turns away or tells the truth. Mine told it. I would never unsee that. Neither would he. We ran the yard while the office took fire properly and sirens finally rolled down the access road from the city. Outside, the wind off the water hit my wet face like a slap. Men shouted counts. Bodies were covered. One of Dante's oldest warehouses burned orange behind us, taking ledgers, ghosts, and the cleanest myth of his family with it. Dante stood beside me, blood seeping through the bandage at his ribs, and watched the roof collapse. Then he said very quietly, "It is over." The city did not become peaceful after that. It became settled. There is a difference. Peace suggests absence. Settled means the violence has found new walls to live behind. 6 weeks passed in meetings, funerals, accountants, and men who had been waiting years to choose a winning side finally doing so with insulting speed. Raffaele's surviving lieutenants either swore to smaller lives or disappeared. The peer insurance paid nothing because nothing in Dante's world was ever as legitimate as the paperwork claimed. Nico healed with a limp that only showed when the weather changed. Teresa was buried beside her sister in a cemetery with winter-bare trees and a stone angel whose nose had broken off decades ago. I visited twice a week. The first time, Dante came but stayed near the gate, hands in his coat pockets, as if grief belonged more honestly to the women who had loved Teresa in ordinary ways. The second time, he stood beside me and set down fresh white roses without speaking. After that, we did not discuss the grave at all. We just went. My old apartment above the bakery had been emptied by one of Nico's men. Mrs. D'Angelo cried when she saw me alive and slapped Nico on the shoulder hard enough to make him laugh. She sent biscotti to the estate every Sunday after that, as if sugar could solve trauma. It helped more than it should have. I stayed in the North Wing because leaving it had stopped feeling like escape and started feeling like a lie. That frightened me less now. Choice, Teresa had said. Call it choice and bear it properly. So I did. People in Dante's house responded to me differently after the pier fire, some with more warmth, some with caution sharpened into respect, a few with plain resentment because wars always need somewhere to put blame after they end, and I was in easier shape than history. It mattered less than it would have in Chapter 2 of my life here. That, more than anything, told me how far I had moved. One evening in early spring, I found Dante in the greenhouse after midnight. The lemon trees had put out tiny white blossoms. The air smelled of wet soil, citrus, and the clean mineral scent of rain on glass. He was standing with one hand, braced on the potting bench, jacket off, tie gone, looking at nothing I could see. I knew that posture now. It meant the day had cost too much, and he had run out of places to hide it. I came up beside him quietly. He didn't turn. You should be asleep. I took out the notebook. You say that as if it has ever helped either of us. A breath moved through him. Almost a laugh. I wrote again. Nico says the West route is yours now. He nodded. For now. And the judges? Paid or frightened? I angled the notebook toward him. Efficient. That got the real shadow of a smile. We stood in the damp warmth listening to water tick through the pipes. My hand rested on the bench near his, not touching, near enough to feel the option. After a while he said, I went to your clinic. I looked up sharply. The speech clinic near Halstead, he said. The one with the blue awning. His eyes stayed on the lemon blossoms. The therapist kept your old exercises. Your father used to sit in the waiting room and balance the accounts for half the block while you were inside. My throat went tight all over again. Why? He answered too honestly to have planned it. Because I wanted to know who you were before I got blood on everything. I could not write for a moment. When I finally did, the pen pressed hard enough to dent the page. You didn't put the blood there first. He read that, then he turned to me fully. No, he said. But I kept asking you to stand in it. I thought of the gate opening, the bus papers, the way I had walked back into his world after Teresa died because leaving had become its own falsehood. I laid the notebook down, then I placed my hand over his. His fingers flexed once under mine, as if unused to being the one steadied. I need to say this plainly, he said, voice gone lower. You can still leave. There will be money. A house if you want one. Another city. I won't confuse what exists between us with debt. It was the most careful thing anyone had ever offered me. It was also late. I pulled the notebook back and wrote only 3 words. I already chose. He looked at the page. At me. At the space in which both our lives had been remade. Then he reached into his coat pocket and set a small velvet box on the potting bench, between the seed trays and the pruning shears. For a second, I did not understand what I was seeing. The world narrowed to the black square of it. Dante did not kneel. Thank God. If he had, I might have cried too hard to read. He opened the box. Inside was a plain gold ring, old-fashioned and heavy, with a tiny line of engraved vines cut around the inside band where only the wearer would know to look. the same pattern that had been etched into the broken crystal. My mother's wedding ring was melted down after the crash, he said. The gold was recast for Lucia when she was older. His mouth tightened once. She never got older. He lifted the ring. This was made from that. My eyes burned. It isn't a fairy tale, he said. I don't have one to offer. I have a life that is sometimes ugly and often dangerous. I have a name people will use against you when they can't reach me any other way. I have the part of me you've seen and the part of me you haven't, all of it. His hand was steady. Mine was not. If you take this, he said, do it knowing exactly what it means. Not salvation, not innocence preserved under glass. His gaze held mine with terrifying gentleness. It means I will stand beside you in every hard thing after this, and when I fail, because I will fail somewhere, I will not lie to you about the shape of it. No speech about forever. No polished romance. Something better. I nodded before I could lose courage. Then I took the pen and wrote one last line because I needed him to have it in words too. Yes, but quietly. That finally made him smile. He slid the ring onto my finger with hands that had killed for me and buried for me and bandaged me, and once held my chin up in a dining room while my life split open. It fit. Afterward, we stood there stupidly for a moment, both of us changed and neither of us performing about it. Then rain tapped harder on the greenhouse roof and I laughed soundlessly at nothing at all. Dante looked startled, then relieved, then something warmer than either. When he walked me back to the north wing, he stopped outside my door and touched the ring once with his thumb, as if checking it was real. Inside, the lamp glowed amber over the desk, and a clean, folded nightdress waited on the bed. Everything looked ordinary. That was the miracle. 9 months later, the kitchen windows were open to a September morning so bright it made even the copper pans look forgiving. The estate had changed with the seasons and with me. Not softer, exactly, but more inhabited. The staff no longer froze when I entered a room on Dante's arm or alone. Mrs. D'Angelo's biscotti tin had a permanent place near the coffee service. Nico had married his limp into his stride and taken to pretending our black cat belonged to no one, when in fact it slept only in his chair. The greenhouse brimmed with late lemons. The north wing had stopped feeling borrowed. I wore Dante's name now. I also wore Teresa's rosary, wrapped twice around my wrist when I cooked, gardened, or felt the old panic climbing my spine for no reason that made sense. It clicked softly against my wedding band as I cracked eggs into a bowl and watched cream ribbon through them. Married life, as it turned out, was not made mostly of dramatic declarations. It was made of his cufflinks left by the sink, of finding my notebook moved from the library to the bedroom because he knew I'd forget where I set it down, of the way he touched the small of my back when passing behind me even if no one else was around to see, of me learning which silence meant anger, which meant exhaustion, which meant he was simply listening to rain. There were no new villains, no whispers of continuation. Raffaele was dead, Paolo was dead, and the city had accepted the new shape of itself with the same cold pragmatism it accepted weather. Danger still existed because men like Dante did not inherit peaceful kingdoms. But the threat that had hunted us had been cut out at the root. The only violence in the kitchen that morning was culinary. I reached for the crystal mixing bowl too quickly. It slipped from my damp fingers. Not all the way, just enough for the smaller prep glass, nested beside it, to topple from the counter and shatter over the tile in a bright, terrible burst. For one absurd second, all the air went out of me. The sound was wrong. Too close to another room, another life. Before thought caught up, I was already bending, hand out, instinct old and stupid, and immediate clear the pieces. Stop the harm. Do it before anyone else bleeds. A hand closed around my wrist. Not hard, hard enough. My whole body stilled. Dante stood barefoot on the kitchen tile in a white shirt with the sleeves rolled, dark hair still damp from the shower, looking down at my hand hovering over the shards. The morning light caught the faint scar in my palm from the first glass I had broken in this house. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he exhaled once, almost soundlessly, and took the dustpan from the counter with his free hand. "You still do it," he said. I looked at the crystal glittering across the tile, then at him, His thumb brushed the inside of my wrist right over my pulse. When he spoke again, his voice had gone lower. Not rough. Bare. You reach for the broken thing before it can hurt anyone else. His eyes stayed on mine. You did it that night. You did it at the warehouse. You do it with people too. I felt my throat tighten. He had never said it plainly before. Not like this. I picked up the notebook with my free hand and wrote because some truths still needed ink to steady them. It wasn't the glass. He read it and gave the smallest shake of his head. No. He set the dustpan aside for a moment, still keeping my hand from the shards. It was that you were bleeding, and you still thought first about what would cut someone after you. His mouth tightened in a way that meant feeling, not anger. Do you know what that has cost me? I looked at him. He answered his own question. It cost me the lie that I could stay untouched if I kept everything controlled enough. He glanced down at our joined hands, at the wedding band, at Teresa's beads looped around my wrist, and thank God for that. The kitchen smelled of coffee, butter, and the clean soap the housekeeper used on the counters. Somewhere outside, gravel crunched under tires at the gate. A normal morning in a house that would never be normal by any other standard. I wrote slowly this time. Do you regret it? He laughed once under his breath. Disbelieving. Then he took the pen from my fingers, turned to a clean page, and wrote in that same narrow script he had used the first time he asked me who taught me. Not for one breath. He handed the notebook back. Then, because he had learned me too, he tipped my chin up with 2 fingers and kissed me softly enough that the world did not vanish under it. It simply settled more firmly into place. Afterward, he cleaned the broken glass himself while I stood beside him with my hip against the counter, watching his careful hands move among the shards. When he finished, he rinsed the dustpan, dried it, and set it back exactly where it belonged. Nothing dramatic, everything earned. He poured the eggs into the pan. I sliced bread. The cat wound around our ankles in search of crumbs. Dante burned the first piece of toast because he was still looking at me instead of the skillet, and I laughed against my own shoulder until he came over and pressed his forehead to mine in surrender. Through the open kitchen windows came the sound of men changing shifts at the gate, the low murmur of Italian, the distant lake wind moving through the cypress trees. His world, mine too now by choice with full knowledge and no illusions left to protect either of us. I touched Teresa's rosary once and set the table for 2. When Dante sat down across from me, the morning light found the ring on his hand and the band on mine, and turned them briefly into something brighter than gold. He looked at me the way he had in that first ruined moment, except now there was no sentence waiting behind it. No threat. No bargain. No locked door. Only recognition, still landing just as hard. And because some endings should sound simple when they are true, this is the last thing I will say. I stayed.